What's next for markets?
I'm Michael Kantrowitz, Chief Investment Strategist at Piper Sandler, where I lead the portfolio strategy team, recently ranked number one on Wall Street in the 2024 All-America Institutional Research Survey. In this week's episode of What's Next for Markets, we're thrilled to welcome our colleague Harsh Kumar to get his latest thoughts on Wall Street's favorite theme, that's right, AI, and favorite stock, you guessed it, NVIDIA. Harsh is a managing director and senior research analyst at Piper Sandler, covering the semiconductor sector. Harsh joined Piper Sandler in 2017. He has covered the semiconductors industry since the mid-1990s. Given the importance of this industry for the economy and the stock market, I can't think of a better fundamental analyst at Piper Sandler to be the first to join our show. Also joining and moderating much of the discussion is Stephen Gregory, head of quantitative research at Piper Sandler. Take it away, Stephen.
Thanks, Michael. I'm super excited to be here with Harsh today. We couldn't have a more timely topic than talking about AI, NVIDIA, and the stocks you cover. I think a good place to start, because there's so much riding on it these days with the market concentration and the Mag 7 all being in that sphere of AI. I don't know if you could talk a little bit, just to kick us off high level, about your views on AI and quantum computing and how that applies in a more layman's way to the marketplace, because we're tech nerds and I don't even know if I really understand what's going on and what the implications really are.
First of all, thanks, Mike and Stephen, for having me on your show. So let me separate out AI versus quantum, because those two will have completely different time frames of commercialization. AI is, of course, now. I guess the question that I get the most is, how long is this cycle going to last? And I think at least this year, but I know for a fact that like every other cycle of technology, this will end at some point in time too. We've tried to scratch our heads and say when that might happen. I'm just trying to answer the question here, but I think it'll be probably CapEx driven or economic driven. In other words, the macro gets so bad that the companies are terrified of investing money and the budgets don't go up and the CapEx doesn't go up. And that's probably what will kill it. Or else you just don't get an incremental return. Like there's a law of diminishing return that kicks in, and the next 10 billion on top of the 100 billion doesn't get you much. And at that point, these companies will have to retrench and stop. But at this point, from the CapEx angle, everything looks greased up all the way through the end of the year, probably into some portion of next year. And there's new technology, like there's reasoning-based model. That's the latest thing that's going on. Reasoning-based models have 10x to 100x compute requirement. They can actually think like a human being and break down a task into smaller tasks and then find you like a legitimate answer. Probably the biggest way to describe the difference between AI or why this is happening versus what was happening 15 years ago with data centers is that if you ask Google, this is the simplest way that I can think of describing it. If you ask Google a simple question, but you gobbled up the language, it wasn't structured well. Like, where am I? Where am I? Or where's the nearest Starbucks? Google wouldn't be able to answer that back 15 years ago because it was x86 based. But the question, where am I and where's the nearest Starbucks, is a complicated one. You have to figure out where I'm sitting, which is in Memphis, Tennessee, my precise location, the closest Starbucks using GPS data, and then I could make it more complicated. Okay, you got to understand my voice now in real time, and don't take 15 seconds to answer my question. You got 2 seconds to answer my question before I make the wrong turn. Then it gets to be a series of complicated tasks that the x86 CPUs just couldn't handle. I know that I gave you like a long-winded example. I could make it more complicated and say, well, I don't like that one on Summer Avenue. I don't like that one. So what is that one? That model has to figure out that one means Starbucks. He doesn't like that one. I got to find the next closest one. And you can go on and on. That's the kind of stuff that we are using today, consuming like water, literally. And that's why all this is working. And of course, companies have jumped on. The most common model is a recommendation model, which is if you like XY category of shows, we'll show you more of it. If you like my Tiger Woods golf t-shirt, we'll show you more like that. You like dog and cat videos? We'll show more of those. So that's AI for you.
So the reasoning models, is that a leap forward and really going to change the application of it? Because I feel like a lot of people are impressed by what we've seen so far with AI, but it's in its infancy. It makes a lot of mistakes, does a lot of things great, but then it's more in the rewording or kind of repackaging existing stuff.
Yeah, so that's interesting. If you tell an AI model multiple times that 2 plus 2 is 6, then it will actually, after a while, start believing that. If enough people tell 2 plus 2 is 6, it'll start believing that 2 plus 2 plus 6 is 6 because it just learns by what it sees on the internet. That's part of the fundamental flaw with AI and neural networking learning these AI models. But I think what you have to go back to is that these tasks are getting more and more complex. For example, a classic example is these chatbots. You had to be pretty precise. Again, I want an American Airlines flight. If you're talking to a travel agent, I want an American Airlines flight on this date at this time. But now you could give some garbled thing like I want to fly to Mexico. And the AI agent will come back with a very sweet talking voice like, well, sir, what date would you like to fly in? And what airport? So it has it is able to develop the context. And that's going towards the reasoning models. And I think it matters. I think what you're going to see is all this CapEx that is being deployed will have a return on the OpEx side. I'll give you a perfectly good example. In the post call with NVIDIA, we asked them, I was like baffled. NVIDIA has hope you guys are ready for this. Let me get the exact number for you. NVIDIA has an SG&A off, ready for this, 1.6%. The entire sales G&A organization of NVIDIA is 1.6% of total revenues. It is an unheard number off. I remember when Broadcom had hit 2.8, I was just baffled. But this is half of that, or whatever, close to half of that. So we asked them the question, how do you get away with this? And they said, well, our entire engineering team uses AI models to help with their programming. We've been doing that in R&D, and now we're using it over G&A. That's a big part of it. And of course, they joke like the next quarter call, all of us will be replaced by avatars, and like we won't actually exist and have jobs, but there'll be virtual people doing a job. But my point is that you can actually have some stunning results. A very successful company with 1.6, 1.7, 8% SG&A. That's sales, G&A, everything rolled into one at that number. That's the goal. We had an AI tour last year, and I think AI implementation expert, I believe it was EY, was telling us that a telecom company wants to save $5 billion in capital expenditures by using AI to better plot base stations across the US. So they are going to overlay GPS with base station locations to be able to cut that much CapEx. In fact, CapEx, OpEx out of the total goal with EBITDA was to go up by $5 billion. So that's what we're striving to. So yeah, there's some benefits that happen with this.
Wow, that's really interesting. A question, and this is building on something you mentioned that caught my attention earlier. One of the first things you said was these trends always come to an end.
They always come to an end.
I do think that's definitely a question people are asking. Like, how long can this continue? Is there going to be commoditization? Is there barriers to entry? Is it just into infinity that we're just buying chips and semiconductors? And how's that compared to 2000?
Where are we on that curve, right? And again, the end of that doesn't necessarily have to end just like 2000 did, as dramatically and violently. And perhaps that's understanding the slope of how the curve peaks and slows is just as important as I think understanding where we are on that curve.
I will say that when it ends, it'll be pretty violent. The speed at which the markets move, I think if you were to come out and say, hey, I just heard that Amazon and Microsoft are reducing CapEx by 5%. I don't think people are going to stop to look at that. They'll just start selling all the AI stocks immediately because this is probably the beginning of a 4-year end or 5-year end for these guys. I think with the valuations that there are and with how much the market caps are, I think it'll be pretty swift in my world. I'll go back about 15 years ago and say, I used to begin my meetings 15 years ago by saying, I'm like a washer and dryer guy. My semiconductor industry grows at 3% a year. That's what the growth rate used to be, between 2 and 4. And a fantastic year was like 6.5 to 7, and we would celebrate, pop champagne bottles, and a bad year was like -2. So we were caught in a band, kind of like a washer dry kind of sales growth band. But then something happened after the crisis. There was a big consolidation phase, which reduced the number of public companies from like 400 something to basically a proper conical structure where you have 5-6 companies with 100 billion plus market cap, maybe 7, and you have 15, 20 companies between 40 and 100, and then you have basically 30 something companies at the bottom. Everything else is gone. And then you also had Because of that, you had increase in profitability. The bigger got bigger. Then you had this whole protectionism thing come along where we somehow got squared off against China. And we decided that we want to be protecting this as an asset. And that was a relatively recent thing in the last 10 years. And the third thing, the biggest thing that happened was things around us started to get smarter. There were no Wi-Fi controlled. If you has a smart house, you probably have a Wi-Fi that you can control from your phone. It was none of that stuff existed. You couldn't control your AC or your heat from your house to alleviate some comfort for your dog or cat. And that is transparent in cars. It's across the board. It's cars got smarter. I heard that the newest series of cars actually don't come with a manual. They come with a flimsy manual, but the manual is built into the car. You're supposed to ask the car, how do I turn on the headlights? How do I work the wipers? And some AI lady will come on and show you. All that stuff, whether you want it or not, is driving content. The car content used to be you would go from like a smarter engine to a more smart engine, but now you go from a smarter engine to a 7-way memory seating to automatic wipers to like all kinds of crazy stuff, LED lighting. That's all those three have taken the growth rate up. And then, of course, came this whole AI buzz. And that took the growth rate to a whole different level. But everything, I'm a firm believer, everything comes to an end. Back in 2000, I was a young analyst, and I was of the opinion that this whole fiber optic trend will go on forever. And companies, you might remember, Mike, a company called AMCC that was a star of the 1995 to 2000 bubble, and that would, continue to go on forever. But we realized it doesn't happen. For these guys, for the AI people, it'll be CapEx driven. The moment the CapEx stops, that's when the party ends, or the CapEx just simply doesn't grow, or the CapEx changes in its structure from chips to something else. But right now, there's enough value added to be able to continue to do this.
So as we move along that curve, and I'm curious your interpretation and observations over the last 12, 18 months, what are you hearing from the institutional investors you speak with, and what are your thoughts of how the money is going to move along that curve? In other words, as it matures, does the money move? Where does the money go? And how are investors mitigating the risk? Are they becoming less concentrated? Are there areas that AI then picks up in terms of where the ROI is going to be that the money's going to move towards? So what does that life cycle look like?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, Mike and Stephen, the pause will be a financial one. It'll be an economic one. It'll be either that the CapEx got too high or the companies can't justify the CapEx anymore. So it won't be really the end of technology, or it won't really be like we overbuilt or anything like that. But then what will happen is those causes will fix themselves, and you will have new things. Like I was at the CES talking to Jensen, and they were showing all this new, stuff that they are going to work on. And they had a robot, and you could call this robot. You'd stand 10 feet away, tell it to come shake your hand. It would come out. It was gimmicky, but it did get up. It with some help, and then it come out and shake your hand and bow to you and do some other things, maybe say a few words. But that is the start of something like a help robot for your house. It'd be nice to have something like a smarter Roomba that cleans your stuff and lets your dog out or whatever. There are industries of that nature that are in the making today, that robotics will be extremely high users of AI capacity because they are not supposed to hurt anything. And they should have some level of intelligence on what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And they also need to be connected at all times. So they'll be driven off of an AI data center. So are cars. Self-driving will require. So Jensen always says that a car company will have 3 factories or 2 factories. One that actually makes the cars with a whole bunch of chips in it and smarts in it. And then one that actually feeds it the self-driving data. And there may be a third factory which actually plans the factory. You can actually run a factory on a computer for 7 years to see the flaws that you might have. It's called a digital twin. So that might be a small third factory that you might have for just a car maker. Robotics, of course, more complicated. But this trend towards improving lifestyles is not going to change. And therefore, I think technology, you might have the AI data center investment take a pause because the hyperscalers maxed out. But then you might have the enterprise pick up. You might have Caterpillar and Ford and GM come up with, or Tesla come up with smarter ways to do things that could probably bring another layer on. But one thing is clear, GPUs or accelerated computing is the way to go. x86 is not the way to go.
One of the things you said that reminded me of a data point, Steve and I have sector data going back to 1926 that it comes from
Wow.
the French and Fama data, Chicago School of Business. And there's two sectors when you look across basically almost 100 years now that, they have their pops and drops, but have generally just trended up and just gotten larger and larger and larger and larger. And obviously one, which we're talking about, is technology, and for all the reasons you touched on. And the other one is healthcare, which perhaps that's a demographic story and a more US specific story. But yes, there will always be new technology. And so I wonder how that's going to reshape some of these market indices. When financials became such a big part of the index, they started kind of changing the industry groups because it was just too broad pulled out the REITs, which used to be part of the financial sector. So how would you think going forward, if technology continues to be a bigger part of our life, bigger part of our business? Like you said, there's going to be there are semiconductors increasingly everywhere. How that kind of plays out in terms of the market composition and how investors think about it.
I think you hit it on the head. I think tech is always going to be a part of the mix. Healthcare has been, I'm just thinking about the $2 trillion market cap game, and it's all tech. It's a bunch of large mega caps, like the Mag 7s are most of it, I think. There may be a healthcare company or two, I'm not sure, or there should be a healthcare company or two. But right now, because tech is so hot, primarily because of AI, it's a bunch of technology. That isn't going to change. NVIDIA might go from 3 trillion to 1.5 trillion, but it's still a big company. And then when they recover their footing, whether it's in a year or two, typically when NVIDIA has a snafu, it lasts about 6 months to 9 months. They're very quick to fix it. And then the stock goes back to its highs and actually goes over its highs. So it'll go back to 3 trillion market cap. The other big ones, guys like Broadcom, AMD, Marvell, Micron, they aren't going away. And now with basically having sort of a strong US government backing them, I think it makes the sustainability a lot more viable.
How do you see the valuation of the group? Because there's definitely differences there today compared to the late 90s and 2000s, which obviously which is maybe one area of contrast. So how do you think of the valuations? Should they be, are you surprised some of these names actually aren't more expensive? Or is it because people don't believe that the earnings and high margins are sustainable? Can you talk about and contrast that today versus 2000?
Yeah, so 2000 was like this crazy bubble time frame. And I think the biggest difference was that a lot of the companies were not profitable or were barely profitable. And that was a function of the lack of consolidation. Now we've had this consolidation in the 2005 to 2012 timeframe that has led to a sustained number of that chronicle shape of our classic industry. And because of that, we actually have super profitable companies. NVIDIA has a operating margins of 60-something%, 62%, I think, and that's not in a good quarter. Broadcom has an operating margin of 50-something%. Almost every company that I cover that's meaningfully decently run has an operating margin of 30%, generates free cash flows. That's a whole different ball game, and good balance sheets too on top of all that. So I think what we've noticed is that if you're a 20% plus grower, if you have capability to be a 20% plus organic grower, you're getting like a 8 to 10 multiple on price to sales, and you're getting about a 30-something multiple on a PE basis. That's assuming your earnings are rationalized. In other words, if you're a smaller company and you're doing $2 in earnings, but I believe in 2 years you can do 5, then you get even a more abnormal multiple than a 30 multiple. Yep. But that's how we look at it.
As the growth rates slow, and that seems to be the most prominent factor, how do you think the companies are going to evolve their strategy to maintain, well, they're going to try to maintain margin, as this becomes more and more commoditized? Will companies lower prices to maintain market share? Companies are always trying to optimize their efficiencies, obviously. So how do you think that plays out? I saw NVIDIA added a 1 penny dividend. Can you touch on that too? I didn't read too much into that, but I'm curious. That's another strategy, of course, to attract, as a company matures, you go from a growth company to ultimately a value dividend income company. We're far away from that right now, but where are we on that right now, and how do you think that's going to evolve?
Yeah, so there's a lot of my companies, particularly in the non-AI space, that actually have something like a 80+% of free cash flow return policy. So if you take a look at NXP or onsemi or Microchip, they all have somewhere between a 75, 80% up to 100% cash flow return policy. That's because they are non-AI, non-fast growers. They're still in that 5 to 10% kind of a growth rate mode forever. I mean, it may go down to 0% in a bad year, but typically on an average, they'll go 5 to 7%, 5 to 10%. When it comes to the high flyers like AI that are out there changing the world, my guys don't think of things like recessions and bumps. They actually have a broad view. Tech is going to be here. GPUs are not going away. We need to continue to invest. They're actually happy to ride out these bumps and recessions, keeping to the strategy. The only thing that they want to manage is the excess inventory so that their results are not bad for like 3 quarters in a row. Typically, they want to solve a problem that they come into in 2 quarters in a row. And most of my guys don't, on the AI side, don't price down. They, like NVIDIA, we had a very frank conversation with them. The latest Blackwell chip is like $40,000. So that's a mind-boggling number. And you say to yourself, how does this make any sense? The way they price things is they say, we're giving you 25 times more power than our chip from 2 years ago. So in other words, if you were to buy one of these, you should have bought 25 of our older chips at $20,000. But we're not going to charge you $20,000 multiplied by 25. We're not going to ask you to pay whatever it is, $1 million something dollars. Let's just split the difference. We are happy to keep our margins at 70 something percent. We'll give you a little break. We'll take a little bit for ourselves. It's priced on value that is created for the customer. When that value diminishes or starts to come to the end of the curve, that's when you will see that whole value scheme start to break down. This whole pricing structure will break down at that point in time. But right now, Jensen famously says, for every dollar that my customers spend on me, they create $5 in like revenues. So that's got to break at some point in time for him to think about changing his strategy. But they don't think about the sessions and they don't think about pauses.
One of the charts we've been showing a lot lately is how the overall multiple of the market has become so intertwined in the weight of these mega names, which NVIDIA sits at the centerpiece of that.
Yeah.
So they're really dictating much more than ever before the overall multiple of the market. And you're talking about things eventually breaking. And I ask this question because it ties into our work in that over the last couple of years, we've stopped doing overall market price targets because our view was, for a couple of different reasons, but one of them being it was starting to become, and it's gotten much worse since over a year ago when we did this, more an idiosyncratic call than a market call, which is our field of expertise. So today we're sitting here with the expert on the idiosyncratic part. You're saying that one day these are going to break, but you do see a year kind of timeline, or at minimum, things are looking okay. Can you just elaborate on that a little more? You were mentioning, you've hit around on this in that when it breaks, it's going to be bad.
Happy to. So if you go back and look, so I've been covering NVIDIA for 5 years, and luckily we waited till there was a problem, like in one of these breaks, before we picked it up. So I think I was in at like 133 before the 10-for-1 split, so like a $13 stock price. So it's a 10 bagger in 5 years, not a bad return whatsoever. But you had to wait for something like that to happen. But even if I hadn't, it would have been a 5 bagger because the stock had been cut in half. If you go back and look over the last 6 years, it's literally like clockwork. NVIDIA will break down every 2 years. It will get cut by 40% as a stock. Now we are coming up on something like that, but this is the biggest trend of them all. So NVIDIA used to, for example, it used to be gaming. NVIDIA was a gaming stock. And then we had an excess inventory correction in gaming. And that's when I came in and picked up the stock. Then we had a crypto bust that led to another downtick of 35, 40, 45%. That lasted 6 months. Like I said, NVIDIA is very good about fixing things in 6 months. And then the mothership arrived with the data center change from x86 to, so this one has the biggest legs of them all. And so we've been sort of riding up on it. In fact, on one of the earnings call, an analyst asked Jensen this and said, it seems like every 2 years you guys go bust, but then you find a brand new market. First it was gaming, then it was crypto, then it's like data center. I mean, what's next? And Jensen's like, well, yeah, there's self-driving, there's robotics, there's all these like applications that are left. But I think it's fair to say that those busts are going to happen for economic reasons, for overshipping reasons, for capex slowdown reasons. You can't really expect the economy to go not to go bad, for example, for a year and have Microsoft expect to maintain the capex. If Microsoft is concerned about the economy or the economic outlook, they're gonna cut. They're gonna cut people. They're gonna cut capex. That's all it'll take. But I think the hit's gonna come from that angle because that's the dog. NVIDIA is just, I hate to say it, NVIDIA is just a tail.
Can you touch on real quick the risks associated with competition from China, and also perhaps touch on some of the policy risks there as well with the new administration, specifically to semiconductors?
Yeah, there's nothing in China that is. So China is competing at the low and the low part of the mid spectrum. So the low and the low part of the mid spectrum of semiconductors. So this is like they're just starting to get into discretes. They're starting to get into IGBTs. They're starting to get into things like analog, low power, but they are not good at mid and upper end of virtually anything at this point in time. And they are nowhere in this AI game. For example, you say to yourself, China doesn't even have an x86 chip. If US really put the squeeze on them, they couldn't even make a PC because they don't have an x86 chip. This stuff has gotten more complex. It used to be that you could make a chip for $20 million, but now Jensen was out famously saying he spent over $1 billion developing the Blackwell chip. So you can't just roll out with some VC funding of $50 million and come up with a chip anymore. That's part of the problem. And then part of it is the learned knowledge and the software structure associated with it. So competitively, NVIDIA is phenomenally well positioned. China doesn't have an answer in AI. The only area that China can play in is the memory piece, but their company, I think I forget the name of it, but it's so poor that its memory is only fit for PCs and laptops. It's not even fit for high-end servers. Forget about high bandwidth memory. So they are not a play. It's a US game right now. They are there in software where you can use a little bit of your brains or a lot of your brains and come up with a competitive offering. So they're trying in that angle, which is good for them, but they're not there in the hardware side. And then protectionism, yeah, this administration is putting the squeeze on. If tariffs come on and tariffs get doubled, my industry is in trouble. Simple as that. China is at any point in time about 20 to 25% of the consumption. So we might ship 40% of our output to China and Taiwan, and then 20% of it comes back. But 20 to 25% of it is consumed in China. And if you start putting tariffs in and out, then there will be a dent to that number in terms of consumption because prices will go up. I might be a buyer of a car at $20,000, but I'm not a buyer of a car at $25,000. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, that seems to definitely be the most tariffs. That is one of the most big pieces of uncertainty, obviously, this year that has potential to be the broadest negative impact. So that could be one of those exogenous shocks that we're obviously maybe seeing a little bit of in recent weeks that could potentially get a lot worse.
This has been amazing and so informative. And we've been asking you questions, and I would like to just toss over, what are institutional investors asking you?
Okay, so the biggest question that I get from institutions is on the timing of the cycle. You know, how many legs, how many innings are we in? Are we in 5th inning, 6th inning? And it's a difficult one to say because we're probably early innings from like the whole tech game, but we are probably, 3 years into a nice run here in NVIDIA, and the capexes are getting pretty big. So I don't know what $100 billion number from Microsoft in terms of capex can go to, or whatever it is, 80 billion. I think I know that it cannot go to like 300 billion because that's the revenue number for Microsoft, but maybe it'll go to 85 or 90, and then it has to start to stall. And when it starts to stall, it's going to hit me hard. It's going to hit my multiple hard. So that's what we'll be watching the most. That's the number one question we get. The second, ironically, is just like use cases of what is the value of AI? What is the ROI of AI? And so Microsoft spending $100 billion, how do they actually capitalize it? How do they actually make money to get some of that money back? With Amazon, it's pretty simple. They show you more of the stuff you like. With Meta, it's simple. They show you more of the stuff you like, and they put ads on it. Microsoft, I'm not so sure. I think they're playing a dual game. Again, this is Brent Braceland's world, my esteemed fellow analyst on software side, but he often talks about that they're trying to go after the search market. They're trying to go after Google share. By incorporating ChatGPT, somehow they hope to take the share. And then, of course, the cloud services piece. They're trying to go after AWS on the other side. So the two big questions is timing and how do I get some dollars back for all this money that I'm spending? I'll just say one more thing. We did a tour last year. We did an AI bus tour on this value of AI, ROI on AI. And one of the CTOs said, if I took you back to 1993 and I said there's this thing called the internet, and I have this company that sells stuff on the internet, it's called Amazon. You might have said, and it's like far away from profitability. You might have said this company's a joke, it's this tiny little company, this new thing, internet. I mean, who knows, right? What it's going to do, whether it's going to work or not. But 20 years later or 22 years later, here we are. And there's no question about the value of it. So this CTO implied that AI is something like that. You might not be in 1992, you might be in 1996 or 97 or 95. You can kind of touch and feel the value, but not all aspects of it are clear to you. But to these tech people that understand tech for a living, there is no question about the value, which is why they don't question the money that's being spent.
How much of that value is, we think about the value idea. What are some of the benefits of AI? The idea of work smarter, not harder, free up time, and for consumers. So let's say consumers now have perhaps more targeted marketing than we already have, and perhaps more free time because some of their menial tasks are being done by AI. Are retailers a big beneficiary of this ultimately? Just as one way to think about, U.S. consumers love to spend, that's for sure. And if maybe they have more time to spend or are more targeted, that could even increase that more dramatically.
The whole idea of recommendation engine is exactly that. We will show you based on your history more of what you like. And it's a win-win situation. Amazon gets rid of its product much faster. And of course, you see more of what you like. Same thing with Netflix, the shows that you like. If you like some kind of exotic theme of shows, then it'll show you more of that and less of the other stuff that you may or may not watch. So there is a stickability, like it becomes a stickier proposition if you have a good AI model doing that. But I think the big return is on the corporate side and the enterprise side. I'll give you an example. Again, an NVIDIA example. BMW ran a factory for 3 years virtually. So they placed all the machines like they were supposed to be placed in a visual environment, and they made the machines run for 2.5 years. And they quickly found out some robots were interfering with other robots, like they were running into each other. The arms were running into each other. So they could pick and place things better. But then interestingly, they could also do like a simulation of a COVID outbreak. So there are 25 people in this division. There's a COVID outbreak and 14 of them don't show up. What is the production hit for that day, for that shift on my unit, my division? So that's where the efficiency lies. I'll give you yet another example. I was at the CES and I love this heavy equipment stuff. So I walked over to Caterpillar before my Qualcomm meeting. They had $1.5 million tractor. And I remember that at our national conference, Growth Frontiers conference, the CTO of CAT had talked about this tractor. I didn't forget John Deere or CAT, one of these two, $1.5 million tractor. But this sucker had an H100 NVIDIA chip on it. It had a $20,000 chip sitting on it, every single one of them. The question is why? Because it feeds 60 different camera inputs into it to not go over children, snakes, livestock, cattle, dog, or whatever, fences. So 16 simultaneous cameras are feeding it input, and that GPU is processing, and then off of a neural network, you don't hit certain things, or it's okay to go over certain other things. That's where the benefit is. This thing works. So I asked them like, how many hours does this work? Said it basically you program it, you set it, and it keeps working. And it only stops when the fuel runs out. You fuel it again, and it's 24/7 till the job is done.
Yeah. So for agriculture, it's a huge plus. I remember actually going with a client in Des Moines, in Iowa. The client was in Des Moines. This was probably about 10 years ago. And we went to the John Deere factory, and at that time they were talking about emissions and how the air coming into the intake of the engine was dirtier than the air coming out of it. And then they were also talking about how all these machines are just able to do their job using GPS. What you describe, I'm sure it's just gotten so much more advanced in terms of safety and other considerations that are obviously important. But I remember that automation idea there, and we actually met with at a farmer, and they were like, "Oh, I don't have to get up at 4 a.m. anymore because I could have some of these things do the work for me at that time." So there's so many benefits to so many different industries.
Yeah, I mean, even self-driving, right? Like eventually, if it actually gets regulated and works, not the version today is 2.5, but level 5 is supposed to be that Stephen gets in his car and says, "Take me to my office," and then he just hangs back and reads the Wall Street Journal on his iPad or something. And then you don't actually interfere. And then when you get done, this is Musk's dream. When you get done, you tell your car, "Okay, go do some Uber money, make some Uber money for me. I will be done at 5 o'clock. Come back at the office, pick me up." And then the car is gone doing Uber tasks. And then it comes back and picks you up, takes you home at 5 o'clock. That's the Musk version of the AI reality.
Thank you so much. I've learned so much. I love your analogy of Amazon back in the day and the internet and NVDA and the evolution of things. I think that puts a nice roadmap for people to think about it, how, especially with NVIDIA, to gaming, to crypto, to AI, to potentially self-driving, and the steps and steps ahead. So it's unbelievable conversation. And these ideas are really driving equities so much. Thank you for being on.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. And until next time, take care.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of What's Next for Markets. Please remember to check out the episode notes on our website, what'snextformarkets.com, for charts related to today's show.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of What's Next for Markets. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to follow Michael on X at Michael Cantro. If you like the show, please let us know by leaving a positive review. The preceding commentary is not financial advice. You should always seek appropriate financial advice from a professional financial advisor in your state. You should not consider this as a substitute for these services. Piper Sandler does and seeks to do business with companies covered in its research commentary or coverage. As a result, investors should be aware that the firm may have a conflict of interest that could affect the objectivity of this commentary. Investors should consider this commentary as only a single factor in making their investment decisions. For full disclosure information, visit www.pipersandler.com/researchdisclosures.